the biggest island being Malta, the sister island being Gozo. We may be small in size, but I can assure you we are very rich in history. Now, the main sources of heraldry in Malta and Gozo are structures which date back to the Aragonese rule of the Maltese island, structures built by the Order of St. John, churches, cathedral and basilicas, because Malta is a very Catholic island, well in name anyway, structures associated with the nobility, structures built during the British colonial era, ordinary family traditions. Many families in Malta display coats of arms on their buildings. And of course there are many books and documents in both public and private collections on the island. Now, I have long been interested in heraldry since my childhood in England, but what gave me the impetus to struggle for an office of arms or a college of arms in Malta was an essay which I read when I was still a medical student by a chap called E.R. Leopardi. Now, up until now, Malta and Gozo have never had an official central authority to govern the use of coats of arms, apart, that is, from the Order of St. John for its own knights. The arms used locally are a collection of variations of foreign arms and of locally invented arms, hallowed by the use of time. In Malta, arms tend to be used by families as opposed to individuals, and this causes some confusion. My interest in the heraldry of Malta specifically on Malta, started with a detailed study of the arms of the Maltese nobility. I discovered great variation in the use of arms, no standardization, all in all, very confusing to my British-trained mind. So, Maltese heraldry, also heraldry in Malta, is popular. Now, what did I find when I studied the heraldry of the nobility of Malta? A great variation due to the lack of central control. Variation in the style of coronets, variation in the style of helms, occasional use of multiple helms for titles of Germanic origin, occasional use of multiple mottos, use of crests with or without helms, variation in the exact position of the coronet vis-à-vis the helm, no fixed system of armorial display for an heir to a title and for his or her siblings, no system of cadency, no standardized system to display the arms of a married couple, and females sometimes using male-styled arms with helmets and crests. Again, just to remind you a little bit of the history, the Maltese Islands were part of the Kingdom of Sicily since the Norman conquest of 1090. They were ceded to the Order of St. John in 1530, but still remained nominally part of the Kingdom of Sicily. They then became part of the British Empire in 1814, after Napoleon was given a kick on his backside, and gained independence in 1964, becoming a republic in 1974. To go back to the nobility in Malta, nobility dates back to the 13th century. The first title, that of Baron of Fiddin, was granted to the Santa Sofia family in 1287. Most of these ancient feudal titles were granted by the kings of Sicily for military service to the crown, but some were simple purchases in the Sicilian system. All except two of these ancient feudal titles are now extinct. The earliest surviving title dates back to 1350. Many titles were created by the Knights of St. John as sovereigns of Malta, and the number of these titles survive to this day. But the titled nobility were not the only nobility in Malta and Gozo. The Consiglio Popolare was the island's traditional council, the one in Malta founded in the 13th century, the one in Gozo in the 14th century. The Consiglio Popolare controlled the internal affairs of the island, but powers were delegated by the Consiglio to four jurats or jurati of the Università of Malta or the Università of Gozo. They were elected to defend the ancient customs of the Maltese and the Gozatans. Now, the electors were all the heads of families, and the elected were chosen from the feudal nobility, honored citizens, professional people, etc., etc. These jurats qualified to have coats of arms. They were armigerous, and they constituted the untitled nobility. Now, the governor of Malta and the governor of Gozo was elected by the relevant Consiglio Popolare, and was usually a titled nobleman. But in any case, he was a member of the untitled nobility. And as I said, each island had its own governor. Now, titles granted by the Order of St. John were mostly nominally feudal. In other words, you could have been created Marquis of this or Baron of that, but the money from that land went straight to the order, and all you had was really an empty title. But they, of course, they were all rich people. They didn't need the money from the fief. A few, however, were tied to private estates. Now, other foreign titles, other titles were created by foreign rulers, and these were mostly recognized by the grandmasters on payment of a special tax. Now, most titles created by the Order of St. John were usually purchases. They were not bestowed in recognition for any great achievement. Most of the nobility's wealth was gained through corsairing, that's licensed piracy, and slave trading, and was then transferred into land. And then a title was bought to give the people some status. Now, under Napoleon, all titles were abolished, very much like the Austrian system we heard about this morning, and titles of the actual patents, many of the patents were burnt in a big bonfire in Valletta, but luckily records of all these titles still exist in the archives of the order. Then came the British, and they found themselves in possession of the only British colony with its own indigenous European nobility. This confused them, and so the British did what they always do when they're confused. They instituted a royal commission, and the royal commission investigated all the titles of nobility, selected 32 titles, creating the Maltese nobility as it now stands. The Maltese nobility is an important part of our history. It has contributed immensely to our culture. The nobles led the popular uprising against the French, and they were prominent in medicine, law, politics, and the church. Nobles were at the forefront of the fight for the rights of the Maltese people, but in 1975, the government of the Republic of Malta passed the so-called Jiha Republica Act, which removed state recognition of all titles. Titles, Maltese and foreign, can still be freely used in Malta, but they are not recognized by the state. Now, the nobility in Malta consists of the Maltese nobility, together with the Maltese holders of foreign titles. They even have a couple of individuals on their way to sainthood. Now, after the rule of the knights, titles were created by reigning pontiffs and by other sources who legally held, or maybe still hold, the fons honorum, including, of course, the British Crown, who created one British title on a Maltese citizen, that of Baron Strickland, now extinct. The title is now extinct. Now, these titles creations do not form part of the Maltese nobility, but they form part of the nobility in Malta. Now, Maltese titles can be inherited in different ways. There is no Salic law in Malta, which insists on male transmission, and some, in fact, are inherited by nomination, which leads to a lot of confusion. The money, the primogenitura, is to go one way, and the title the other, leaving a penniless marquis and a very rich first cousin. That's how it was. But Maltese titles never seem to become extinct. Somebody always comes up with a bright idea to give it a kiss of life and carry on. The nobility is a strong source of heraldry on buildings, in churches, on monuments, and documents. Now, following the 1878 Royal Commission report, the Committee of Privileges of the Maltese Nobility, on which I served for about 12 years, was formed, and it was empowered to deal with the succession to Maltese titles as recognized by the British government. But all recognitions were without prejudice to any decision taken by a Maltese court of law, or higher still, by the Privy Council in London. Now, following the 1975 Act, the committee lost its status and is now a purely private organization devoid of any power at all. In fact, the courts in Malta have ruled that anyone in Malta can style themselves exactly as they please. It is of no interest to the government. You can call yourself whatever you like. Now, the foreign title holders have an association called the Association Foreign Title Holders, which has 3 royal patrons. Okay, now, I, for many years, was agitating for an office of arms, and I finally convinced the then Prime Minister on the importance of this, and I entered into detailed correspondence with him, and he and the Cabinet were convinced by my argument, and they felt that the Cultural Heritage Act, as it then stood, could include heraldry within its remit as part of Malta's intangible heritage. So, in consultation with the Cabinet, the Prime Minister decided to set up the Office of the Chief Herald of Arms in Malta under the control of Heritage Malta, which is the government body which deals with all matters concerning heritage and culture. So, I was appointed Chief Herald of Arms of Malta on the 21st of March 2019. My appointment, together with the formation of the office, was announced, I beg your pardon, in the Government Gazette, because it was an official government appointment. I was given an office in Fort St. Elmo, which saw it's at the mouth of the Grand Harbour in Valletta. This was the scene of very fierce fighting, hand-to-hand fighting between the Knights and the Maltese and the Turks in the Great Siege of 1565, and it was heavily bombed by the Regia Aeronautica and the Luftwaffe in the Second World War. My office was given the unique privilege of being able to use the arms of Malta on our own coat of arms. This privilege was given to us by the Cabinet. The use of the arms of Malta are very strictly controlled. Not everybody can use them. Okay, so the office was set up. I was made Chief Herald, and it was then decided to see whether this idea was going to take off, whether it was going to be a success, or whether it was going to be a complete waste of time. It exceeded our expectations, and I received applications for grants and registration of arms from all over the world, despite the COVID pandemic. So the authorities decided that it was now time to entrench heraldry in the laws of Malta, so there would be no equivocation. Heraldry was going to become official, as you like. And the first thing they had to do was to amend the Cultural Heritage Act so as to ensure that it specifically mentioned heraldry within the remit of Heritage Malta. This to ensure the permanency of the office of the Chief Herald. So the Cultural Heritage Act was duly amended, and it received presidential assent on the 20th of July 2021. Now, in accordance with the provisions of the amended Act, it was decided that the modus operandi of the Office of the Chief Herald also needed to be formally codified in law. Previously, we had our own regulations which were advertised on our website, but it was now felt that we had to operate under a formal legal system approved by Parliament. So detailed discussions then followed between myself, Heritage Malta, the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Justice, and the Office of the Prime Minister. As an ex-officer in the British Army, I found the bureaucracy soul-destroying, but I persisted and I persevered, and aided by glasses of Chivas whiskey, I got there in the end. Now, a full set of regulations was prepared, presented to Cabinet for its approval, and the Cabinet approved on behalf of Parliament, because we had given it the power. And these regulations were published as a legal notice in December 2021. Now, while all this talking was going on, I was very, very busy presenting arms to VIPs in Malta. Here is me presenting arms, personal arms, to the President of Malta, Dr. George Vella, to the Archbishop of Malta, Archbishop Scicluna, and to the Diocese of Gozo via the Bishop of Gozo. Now, the regulations, I said, were published on the 24th of December 2021, and they passed into law a month later on the 21st of January 2022. And this was published again in the Government Gazette. Everything we do now, every time we sneeze or we cough, it's in the Government Gazette. I was summoned to the office of the then Minister of Culture, Dr. Herrera, and I was given a letter which confirmed my position. My position as the sitting Chief Herald, having been appointed in 2019, was confirmed, but I was now further confirmed by the Minister on the specific remit of Parliament. Okay, the new legislation contains some important clauses which need to be talked about. First of all, Malta is a republic. Malta does not recognize titles of nobility, but the government recognizes coats of arms. So it will recognize this coat of arms as belonging to this individual. Now, the coat of arms may contain a coronet, supporters, and the other trappings of nobility. Fantastic, if that's what you want to interpret. It's your privilege. But as far as the government is concerned, it's a picture, and that belongs to you. Now, en passant, in the letters patent and documents of registration, I have permission, I'm allowed to use titles of nobility, members of orders of chivalry, what have you, because they are being made solely for historical purposes. A grant of arms from Malta does not mean that the government is recognizing your right to be baron of this or count of that. It is simply recording these details for posterity. But it is emphasizing the fact that you are entitled to that picture as your coat of arms, whatever it contains. Our right to use the arms of Malta was confirmed, and our right to grant arms and to recognize arms for both Maltese nationals and foreign nationals was confirmed. And I was given the discretion by Parliament to recognize and register the arms for whoever I thought should be recognized or registered. I have full discretion. Now, under the new legislation, every time I receive an application for arms or for a grant or registration, this has to be advertised in the Government Gazette, and then 21 days have to pass for anybody who may object to a certain individual having arms. They might say, listen, he can't have these arms because they belong to me. He has 21 days, or she has 21 days to voice an objection. If not, then we proceed. Now, every year we are obliged to publish a list of all the coats of arms we have granted or registered. These will appear in the Malta Government Gazette. And this is the first lot, having just been published yesterday. And as you can see, very first on the list is the President of the Republic of Malta, Dr. George Vella, which shows you that you can't get more official and recognized than this, whatever people who are slightly stupid may say. Pardon my French, I'm British trained. Now, we also are obliged to keep a register of arms, and this will be put online, where we will record all the documents of registration and letters patent, and a record of all honours. The government may not recognise your honour, but it is going to be registered. So the fact that you are baron of this or count of that will be recorded in the register for posterity. Don't tell me how I achieved this, but I achieved it. Now, the problem arose, what about coats of arms which had been granted or registered prior to the passage of the legislation? Not a problem. I was given full discretion, and I wrote personally to every single individual who had received arms or had their arms registered by us prior to the 22nd of January or whatever it was this year, and they received a letter confirming that their arms were recognized, they would appear in the Government Gazette, and indeed have already appeared, and of course they will be entered in the register. So it's all being done properly. The Office of the Chief Herald of Arms of Malta has several functions. The re-registration of arms already formally granted by another recognized heraldic authority, the new creation of personal and impersonal arms, registration of already established personal and impersonal arms, registration of arms held by local councils, and ecclesiastical heraldry, both personal and corporate. We have granted arms to several ecclesiastics, both Roman Catholic and members of the Reformed faith. To date, this is the exact figure. I have lots of in my in tray, but granted or recognized, registered to date, total of 90. As you can see, the bulk from Malta, but quite a number from other countries, being led by USA and Italy, and then other countries as well. Now, a few weeks before the papal visit in April, I was asked by the Marian Shrine in Gozo, our equivalent of Fatima and Lourdes, to grant them arms that they would be in place for the papal visit. So at some speed, I granted arms, and here I am presenting them to the rector of the Marian Shrine in Gozo. Now, as I said at the beginning of my talk, the heraldry in Malta was slightly confused, but I have now drafted a system of Maltese heraldry which I intend to follow. There will be bumps along the way, exceptions will have to be made. After all, we are dealing with 500 years of history here. Now, as regards the nobility, in deference to the history of the nobility, I have no intentions to change their arms in any way. I will register the arms they have always used, even if they may be slightly heraldically controversial. Now, to go to the arms of the Office of the Chief Herald, we proudly display the arms of Malta in a blue disc, which in heraldry is called a hert. That represents the Mediterranean Sea. The golden rim of this disc indicates or represents our imperial and royal past. The maces of authority have finials for Aragon and for Fortress Malta under the knights. the two main sources of our heraldry. The Maltese cross behind the shield is there to represent the National Order of Merit, and it's very important to note that the arms have a crest coronet, not a coronet of rank. I am not a king of arms. I am simply a mere herald. Chief herald I may be, but I am only an officer of arms. I am not a king of arms, so I insisted that my coronet should sit on top of a torse or wreath. The motto, Virtute et Constantia, is one which has reverberated throughout the history of Malta, first used by Grand Master de la Valette in his dispatch to King Philip of Spain when describing the victory of the Great Siege in 1565. Our right to use the arms of Malta, as I have already said, were given by the Cabinet on the 3rd of June 2019 and formally confirmed by Parliament in January this year. Even though I am a herald, I have absolutely no intention of parading in a tabard. If you try and do this in Malta, people will start throwing tomatoes and eggs at you. So, no, I'm simply use a chain of office, very proudly bearing the arms of Malta on my chest. For those of you who are interested in the heraldry of Malta, I have published several books, most of which are now out of print, but this book on the right is available, and this book on the right here as well, which was published a couple of years ago, is also available. I hasten to add that all royalties go straight to animal charities. I'm a great animal lover. So that is the end of my talk. I think I've kept to time. And my email address is chiefherald@gov.mt. If any of you is interested, please drop me a line. I promise to answer every single email I received. So that is the end of my talk. If you have any questions, I will be delighted to answer them. Thank you.
Tenemos unos minutos para algunas preguntas o comentarios.
Non è una pregunta, ma è una considerazione di un trabajo de un heraldo de Estado. Este signore, il dottor Gauci, ha presentato l'ultimo cargo di Stato di un ufficiere ovale, con una modernità aderente ai nostri tempi. Per la prima volta noi italiani troviamo una soluzione nel mondo per poter avere una concessione di Stato con un pieno e valido soggetto araldico. Noi in Italia, come famiglie o persone fisiche, non possiamo avere un atto dello Stato che certifichi il nostro possesso della famiglia, riferito all'araldica. Grazie al dottor Gauci e alla sua open mind, una mentalità completamente aperta e aderente alla realtà dei nostri tempi del XXI secolo, regala un'opportunità unica perché noi italiani e voi del mondo possiate avere uno scudo araldico che proviene dall'autorità dello Stato. Ricordate, i privati sono privati e valgono nulla, perché è un club di amici. Lo Stato è la rappresentazione vivente della volontà e della sovranità popolare di un agglomerato di persone che vive in una nazione. Quindi per queste considerazioni io ringrazio il dottor Gauci per quello che ha fatto per tutti noi.
Grazie.
¿Alguna